Welcome. I thought I'd do a little story time and talk about the time I bought a 3D pen. So I was waiting for my first 3D printer, which was the Easy3 K9 introductory printer. And I was waiting because I wanted to create spool from PET bottles. So I had gotten on that recycling kick and I wanted to see if it was possible to recycle our water bottles and turn them into filament, which would be the ultimate life hack for me because we go through so many. So to that end, since I didn't have a 3D printer yet, like the BQ over there, or the Easy3 that I had and returned, I used this 3D pen with some PLA filament to try to create my own spool for winding up filament that might come from heating up a bottle. So I still plan to do this project in the future, but I waited, I think wisely, until I got a proper setup. Now, I've seen several videos on YouTube, one from eCodeCat and a few others, but essentially what they do is they cut the bottles of PET into so they'll take a bottle such as this, like a Kirkland bottle or something like that. If there's any ridges in it, they'll heat it up and then they will melt it. They will melt it to make it even. The bottles that I have are already like that. They'll remove any plastic wrapping around it, try to get some of the sticky parts off, the adhesive. And then what they do is they cut it into strips. Those strips are then usually wound up or collected, and then they are fed through an extruder. Now, for our purposes, from what I've seen online, there are several ways to do this. The extruder could be a literal hot end extruder from something like an Ender 3, or you could just buy the piece online and provide your own power to it. You know, your knowledge of electrical, your skill, that's going to be based on your skill level. So, but regardless, you can feed a extruder through. You can feed the filament of the strips of PET, as you see here, through the filament, and then they have a spool that, like this, that the filament would be wound around. My first initial thought was to use a 3D pen as the extruder, as it would have all the electrical components needed, and I could also control the temperature and the speed of the extrusion. Now, this isn't a terrible idea, so I did take apart the 3D pen, but I realized, as you may come to see, that the nozzle for the 3D pen is just frankly too small for extrusion and made of a ceramic material that did not lend itself to what I needed. Now, at the same time, what I could do, and who knows, I may do this in the future, I could have resoldered the circuit so that the nozzle or the hot end extruder of the 3D pen was connected to an actual hot end, but I would have to make sure that the voltages were correct. In the end, the solution that I came up with was relatively simple. I saw it online. But essentially what you want to do is to get yourself a hot glue gun. And if you take a look at a normal hot glue gun, you'll see that it has a much larger extrusion point here. The only thing that you'll need to make sure of is that it is a high enough wattage to melt the PLA, or the PET, the PET that you would be melting. In this case, the one I bought from Amazon, the Sure Bonder, was not high enough wattage to do what I needed it to do. So I had to swap that out for something with a little bit more higher voltage, but the concept is still the same. So as you go through, as the strips of PET bottle goes through the hot glue gun, and the hot glue gun is connected to electricity, it will come out as filament. Now what you'll also need to do is add some fans to cool the filament down, and then you'll need to add a motorized spool winder, which is what I tried to make over here with a 3D printed, a manually created 3D pin spool that took like 2 hours to make by hand. And as you wind it, or as the motor winds it, it will continue to pull from the extruder until the filament strips run out. And generally that's how it works. Now in my case, one thing that you'll probably notice is what I did is I repurposed a cheap razor blade that had a motor on it. And this is a general DC hobby fan motor, but what I liked about it is it had a rechargeable battery on it, and it's a pretty simple system. So that's the part I do like about it. What I would need to change, and I've already purchased these items, is a voltage regulator to control the speed at which the motor would run. Now for the 3D pen, it worked fairly well, but as you can see, it doesn't hold a candle to the quality that a 3D printer can do. What I had to do to get it to this level of quality was to sketch out my rendering on a sheet of paper and then use the 3D pen to meticulously etch and draw out the sides, and then literally wind it together and melt it together. It was a painstaking process, took about 2 or 3 hours, and the result came out decent, but definitely not the quality you would want. So what I plan to do is, and let me show you how it would work. I think there's battery in here that I can do a little demo. So give me just a moment. But essentially, it would wind it up like so. And as you can tell, I used some rosin, some soldering rosin, to connect the DC motor to the cap. This is just a prototype anyway. It could work in theory, but I'm going to 3D print a complete system for a spool winder and motorize it later on. And I'll do that in a separate video. But I just wanted to show you how that would work. So it would wind up the spool, and I would still need a DC regulator to control the speed of this because this is much too fast. But it would slowly wind the spool, and it would come out of the hot glue gun, and the filament would keep feeding in because of the spool that's being wound here. So let me turn that off. But yeah, that's the general prototype. As far as slicing it, I can show you that. Give me just a moment. So initially I had a metal pole here, and the razor blade was connected to the ends of this metal piece. The bottle would stand on this metal rod and would be cut by the razor blade, and it would feed into the extruder, which I never got to that point until now, which I'll be doing in the next few days. So stay tuned to my channel. It's going to be very interesting as I learn to create this PET bottle filament recycler and start doing some interesting PET 3D prints. If you like this, subscribe for more. I want to hear from you. Leave your questions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I want to know what kind of prints should I make next. Should I continue trying to do 3D pen based prints, putting things to the test to see how long it would take? Let me know. All right, thanks.